I'm Thomas, and this is Mirrorinmycell, a conversation series on the strength, truth, and humanity known through incarceration. My normalish life was interrupted when some stowaway cannabis of mine reappeared at a Belarusian border checkpoint. The sentence would be 3 to 7 years. I was forced to witness myself and understand the power I do have. It changed me and how I saw my life, and now I want to know how others have been changed by it. My mum is a GP, former head doctor of Penny Brown Cancer Care UK, and lecturer at the University of Bristol. She's a quite eminent figure in the integration of holistic medicine into biomedical best practice, especially around cancer care. But she's also my mum. And that's more of why I recorded this conversation with her, because it was her and my dad who belayed me out of prison in Belarus, negotiating with lawyers, diplomats, NGOs, bureaucracy, autocracy, family and friends, to cup and channel the love and willpower of the community to get me out. I have lived quite an independent life in the last years, going to university at the other end of the country, living abroad for the last 5 years, and constantly scheming how to end up further from a cultural comfort zone. And through that, my parents were quite deprioritized. It wasn't always desirable or obvious how to integrate them into my journeys. But that all obviously changed when I was writing down their phone numbers at midnight on a piece of paper in Belarus, handing it over to Eleni and saying goodbye. I love my mom more than you can possibly imagine. And when we recorded this conversation, it felt like we were recording it for anonymous listeners. But now it feels much more obvious that it was for us. I nevertheless want to thank you for all being part of the story and being love in our sails as we navigated that adventure and all of the other ones. I hope you appreciate the conversation. Hi, nice to see you. Nice to be back here in Bristol.
Very lovely to have you back here in Bristol.
So 2 weeks ago now, it was 6 months since I got out of prison in Belarus. I left Berlin, quit my job. It changed a lot in my life. But we didn't actually spend that much time together since you picking me up from Belarus. And then I came back to Bristol and I was here for 2 weeks. So it felt like we cancelled each other out by how traumatized we were in these 2 weeks somehow. It just felt like weirdly normal, or I don't know, that's my memory of it. We never actually properly had a conversation about what it was like for you. So I wanted to have that. That's a very big part of the story. I feel like I've actually gotten a lot of that story from lots of different people and been even bizarrely moved. It clearly impacted people in a very big way, in a way that I had no control over. And you're probably the person that it impacted the most, apart from me, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's right. We haven't really had a chance to, and I haven't spent much time really thinking back about how it was. So it's good to have this opportunity, and it's quite moving. I spent sometimes this afternoon rereading from the beginning, I haven't yet got to the end, but it was remembering those beginning bits and the sort of gradually forming community that came together slowly, but building momentum and some of the things that we shared. Yeah.
So what happened? Or how would you describe what happened?
The initial shock of the phone call, and it was strange because it was Jerome's phone that rang, and Irene was ringing Jerome's number, and initially he just had it on, it wasn't on speakerphone, so I could hear what he was saying and couldn't really make out what was going on, and it was close to midnight, and I thought he obviously somebody was in trouble, but I didn't at all realize it was you, and I thought it must be a friend of Jerome's or something, and then it gradually became clearer. So I guess there was the initial just hearing the situation, and at that point really not knowing much about Belarus at all. So not knowing whether it would be different if this had happened in Croatia or Serbia or anywhere else, not really appreciating quite how extreme the situation might be, but hearing kind of alarm bells going off. I think, so then it was just like, okay, what can we find out about the situation? How can we get some contact? Because that felt the most important thing, is to just find out if you were okay. As soon as we had a number for Ala, I think we were trying to make contact with her. The only person we could make contact with was your lawyer. And she was like a duty lawyer who didn't speak English. So initially it was trying to set up a meeting where we could get some kind of translation. I think the next day was definitely a bit of a bonkers day, trying to find a lawyer who could speak English, trying to find out, contacting embassies and trying to reach out to the Hungarian consulate and trying to speak in broken Hungarian and find out how important it was that you were Hungarian, and getting a very initial message from you, that I think the one that Irene took a photograph of, and it just said, please get me an English lawyer, and that was all it said. Love you lots. And just trying to imagine how you were doing and what sort of conditions you were being held in. And yeah, I guess it was the not knowing. I think a massive turning point was your first letter, which talked about appreciation and gratitude and feeling loved and supported and sounding strong and sounding like you had a plan for you and that you could make it work. And I think that was incredible from 2 points. One was to know that I think I really trusted that you wouldn't just say you were okay if you weren't okay, or that somehow you'd know if you weren't, and that letter made it sound, it felt enough genuine likeness. And I could see how you had the building blocks to find that response, to generate that response in you. And there was a moment of just profound gratitude for you being you and you having that ability and that clarity in that moment, not to panic and not to just whimper, because I think it would have been much harder if you really had been just telling us how awful it was the whole time. And a bit of me was wondering whether you might be thinking that and trying to hide how awful it was. But actually, I weighing it up, I trusted what you wrote and felt like you were being, it felt realistic enough, and also slightly, I also haven't had the experience of you easily putting yourself in other people's shoes and thinking, how will this make them feel, and changing your behavior to make other people better. That I haven't experienced that much from you. So I thought it would be weird if suddenly you were doing that at an extreme point when communication was very limited. So that was the one thing, is gratitude for you finding that resilience and being able to communicate it and sound like you were really actually living it. And the other was just like profoundly being moved because, again, in our communication up until that point for a number of years now, we haven't really talked about the things you're grateful for, and they certainly have never they've never included us. It feels like, or what I've experienced is more your sort of dissatisfaction with the world and or it's not dissatisfaction, but your clear-sighted view of the problems of the world or what needs to be improved, and also what needs to be improved in us. It's felt like that's been more top layer of the conversation. So to suddenly hear in quite a public way, but also in the letters that you just sent to family as well, how much you loved us, was really very powerful and very almost, I suppose you wrote in one of your letters, I'd be lying if I hadn't fantasized about something like this sort of happening. And I suppose in my dreams, I'd fantasized that something would happen that would allow us to communicate about how much we loved each other and how much we respect and how much we admired each other. But actually in the reality of our communication, for a long time it had felt like that had been difficult or just hadn't been the main thing that we had talked about. So suddenly hearing that or reading that and feeling your love for us, but also for many people, was extraordinary. And it was like, I suppose it was like a tap being turned on that you knew was there somewhere, but just wasn't very easy to find. And so there was a real feeling of optimism around, actually, this could be something. I could quite early from that first letter on see how this could be turned into something really positive and could end up being something that we hadn't wished for, hadn't expected, but that could actually end up being something that we were all very grateful for in a strange way. On the one hand, there was the kind of, we've got to get him out. On the other was that this sort of trust in your ability to navigate what you were going through. And as long as things didn't get much more awful, be strong and stay strong while we got whatever we could sorted out. And then this feeling that out on the other side, there might be something that a more loving way of being with each other, or a more expressively loving way of being with each other. Because I think it's interesting. I feel like my life is pretty blessed in so many ways. And I think often I've struggled to think, how could life be better? But, I have told you this before as well, but I've felt puzzled and challenged by my relationship with you, just because it has felt painful at times and difficult to know how to navigate for the best. And this felt like it was a real, and that had felt quite stuck. And this felt like it was just like a massive stir up of that whole thing, which allowed us to be with each other in a very different way. So there were the currents of like genuine fear, because I think we were being told how awful some of the prison conditions were in Belarus, and how in certain places, if you got sent to certain places, there was a very strong likelihood of you actually being either physically or psychologically, emotionally damaged after coming out, type of thing. And that just felt awful. I think there was some early kind of communications that certainly from the initial lawyer, from Allah, who said, I don't think he realises how serious, he doesn't seem to be taking this very seriously. He may not realise just how serious things could be in it. And I wasn't sure, again, whether you did know or whether you didn't, and how scared you might be. So on the one hand, there was that scary, dark place of it could go horribly wrong. Then there was these kind of incredible letters that were coming back from you, and this incredible sort of sense of the right kind of support coming to us at the right time. And just when we felt a bit desperate, then some other lead would come in, or a door that had felt quite closed would suddenly budge a little bit.
That's all in the process of working out how to get me out.
Yeah. So there was a feeling of the dark, scary place, the letters from you being this incredible sort of ray of sunshine, and things that you were talking, just the sort of your appreciation of the kind of the music from the church and the sort of vision of the leaves, and then descriptions of your cabin mates, and this sort of sense of you somehow being on this journey that you were managing to take us all on, that wasn't a scary journey, or that was a kind of rich, new, incredibly, I think many people were moved by the perspective it shone on our lives, and how much we take for granted, how much we complicate things or mess things up just by the busyness, or the sort of things that maybe the unnecessary baggage that we carry around and create for ourselves. And this sort of, it did feel like a beam of light being shone on us from somewhere. And even just the sort of reminding us to dance to silly Christmas music, and kind of, there was a sort of a lightness that came, and a strength that came from reading your letters and from the strength of the community as well that were responding to those letters and rallying around and responding to the updates. And then there was the actual nuts and bolts of the kind of court case being prepared and suddenly the legal mechanism for maybe seeing a way out of this and the right support coming from Hungary or the right contacts. So it all felt like there was an edifice being built there. I guess that it did feel really important to not be too hopeful and not be too doomy about it, but just do what we could. So in a way, there was less emotionality about that. But I think the fact that it always seemed another positive thing we could do helped keep us centered and focused.
One thing I found myself saying is basically being like, it was somehow liberating to be in prison as well, because it was so out of my hands what was happening outside, and like at the beginning really like impulsively wanting to be involved in what's going on the outside, feeling somehow like I was part of it. I remember like writing on the accounts for the lawyer and having strategies in my head and worrying about the evidence and being very engaged in all of that stuff. And then at some point, I mean, like everything slowed down, realizing that like actually these are not the buttons I have to push. These are not like these are not my levers to pull. But the only thing I can control is how I deal with this and how it goes for me, like inside this room.
And that is liberating in a sort of way.
Yeah.
So it's liberating of responsibility.
Yeah.
And making it very clear what your responsibility is. Because I think it's one of the things that it does imprison us is that we feel responsible for everything in the world. And sort of it's really easy to get overwhelmed. And also I think, seriously, I do think being liberated from phone and contact and that sort of pressing intrusion on our thoughts.
For me, that's one of the big unresolved things I would say is, what do I take responsibility for? I really didn't have the impulse to suddenly be responsible for the politics of a Eastern European nation or to make noise about things. It was much more, the impulse was much more to be, I'm responsible for myself and being not necessarily, I'm only interested in myself, but like making sure that I can be in control of how I respond to the world and in control of the energy and actions that are mine in the world. It was only because of how I felt and what I knew of you and Dad and our family, and how much love I always knew there was for me, that I was able to do that. I think to not worry, or to just be to trust, which I don't think is something that everyone would have had. And I think that's a massive privilege that I took in with me, basically, and like a massive debt of gratitude I have to predominantly to you and Dad, but like also the wider community around you both, which is, it's not an accident that there are those people in your lives as well.
No, but your friends were also a big part, and your work colleagues were also a big part of that, and helping us make wiser decisions too, and feeding into that, definitely. So I think in part you did create that, and so that, yes, absolutely, there's stuff that is a privilege, and then there's other stuff that we contribute to.
And what was it? So if I was slowly realizing that I had no means to exert myself on the stuff that happened outside of the cell, was there also a process of letting go in some way, or just letting things be? Like, what was inside the cell for you?
Very good question. I do think working with people with cancer for so many years has really helped me realize that you can't control everything, and that you have to do your best to set up the things that you can set up. And then there's an awful lot of trust and luck and reaching out for support as well that you can't do on your own. So I suppose in terms of inside the cell, there was a kind of, I think there was a reconnecting with a sense of, with something bigger and putting our trust in that. If this is meant to be, this does feel like when we got that first letter saying, in some ways, this feels like it was meant to happen, and thinking about it could have been in Iran, it could have been in so many other places. The fact that you were traveling on a Hungarian passport, the fact that Hungary have this special relationship with Belarus, the fact that this gave you a lot of what I think you'd been looking for in Iran in a weird way, and in a way which involved us more than it would have if you'd gone to Iran. We would, and just had your experience. Obviously, if you'd got into prison in Iran, that would have been a whole different story. And let's not go there, because I think we would have had far fewer levers to pull. But if you'd just gone off and had your kind of detox experience somewhere else, I don't think you'd have written letters to us. For me, there was a kind of, the universe is giving us something really important here. How do we... And I guess for me, it was around, similar to you, it's like, how do I bring my best self to this? How do I do this in a way that feels like it will set us up for getting the most helpful and most, I guess, if the ultimate currency is love, then how do we get the most love out of this situation for whoever else is it, for everyone involved, really? How do we get the most out of what life is offering us here at this point? And how can I handle myself and bring the best of myself to this situation in a way which makes that a bit more likely, makes the best outcomes a bit more likely for everybody?
It's crazy that you were able to do that, because I got to that frame of mind. But I think it was, when I think back to it, it was so much about just like the emptiness and the lack of things that were happening, and being able to observe myself in that setting and say, was that a thing that was in Thomas that I want to be? Is that behavior that I associate with the person that I want to be? Should I do it differently next time? Or why did that happen like that? What do I know about myself? And what do I know about the person I want to be? So it's surprising to me that you were able to end up somewhere similar with everything that crazy outside life is. Plus, by the way, your son's in prison in Belarus.
Yeah, but again, maybe I suppose what just being confronted with lots of people who have been diagnosed with cancer, who maybe don't have that much to live, that is often a question they ask themselves. Am I living my best life? Am I doing what I can? And so, and ending up in quite deep conversations with them, it's like, why would I need to wait till I have cancer to be asking myself that question? And certainly in a situation where the outcome isn't certain, or where it's not clear what my next steps need to be, then really one of the best ways to navigate is like how like you said, just to creating the next best 5 minutes that you can.
It's been like very confusing for me being alongside people that were like part of such a bigger story in some senses, like everyone that was in prison in Belarus because of...
You mean the national story that they're part of?
Yeah, the national story that they're part of. And it felt like I were like being exposed to that and seeing people who much more understood themselves as part of that bigger story. Whereas for me, it was like such a individual thing, or it was such an internal thing. Coming out, the muscle memory has been to just, I think, I feel like I am different in lots of ways, but if I look at myself and how I behave and things that I'm doing, it's probably pretty recognizable to... I could have imagined that if Belarus hadn't happened, I would be doing exactly what I'm doing now in some ways. I don't know, who knows? But it's like, it also feels like a lot of pressure to be exposed to so much stuff that is so significant, and so many people would be intrigued to hear about my perspective on.
Mm.
That I think it's been, that there's like a certain pressure that comes with that, basically.
Do you mean from other people's sort of interest and kind of?
Yeah, or just people almost, I suddenly felt like I was a celebrity. I suddenly felt like I was some like wellness guru. I suddenly felt like I'm in Hungary and they're like, we've all been praying for you. Here's a room of 20 people that have been praying for you. It's okay. And then having these like Q&A sessions when I got back to Bristol. I don't know. It was like it didn't.
Yeah.
No, not in an egotistical way, but I am really like this. And as I said at the very beginning, almost like the realizing that there's a story, or it almost felt like a body of work that people have been connecting to without any of my say about how they've been reading it. People are talking to me about Jesus. People are talking to me about my relationship with you. People are talking about Buddhist idea. I don't know. There's so much stuff which it suddenly feels like I'm, so many ways that people have taken it to mean things, which at the beginning it was weird. It was like, that's not really, even like everything that you did, all the crazy stuff that happened on the outside, that was not my story in some ways, but that was like the story that people wanted to hear about. And then what happened? I'm like, see, it had nothing to do with me. But then my mom was speaking to these people and blah, blah, blah. There's billionaires, there's Kremlin, like, I don't know, all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, I will tell you that, but that's not really what it was like for me. And then just needing to be fine with that and needing to not take ownership of what it meant or what it could mean and what I was supposed to do next because of it, basically.
An adventure story is a powerful, it's there's a mythical quality about what you've been through. And I guess just recently in the week, there was that story of people being on a sailing boat for abandoned, totally out of contact, for how people, when they find that, it is a great story, exactly. And when those sorts of stories, and Paul Dieppe with the Kuwait kind of kidnapping, and those stories capture our collective imagination, I think, because they are very archetypical in a way. You face an adversity, you don't know if the adversity is bigger than your resources, and then help comes from somewhere, and you go through a dark
Especially
night
in
of the soul.
Belarus, the characters, good and evil, are very clear.
Absolutely. And the kind of restrictions and the sort of, it's just such an extreme situation as well. If it happened in France, I think people it would have been a very different story. Again, same like the fact that it happened in Kuwait, and like, just at that time, makes that story very powerful. So I guess and I don't know how, I find it helpful to think, but not become obsessed by, was like, why has this happened to our family? Why is it, or not why, but given what we've got.
I think, what can it mean, basically?
Yeah, what can it mean, exactly?
Because I was like, what role the universe or something else played in it, basically, and was having the strong sense that I'm here for a reason and I'll leave when I'm ready to leave, basically. And when I've gone through the things I need to
learn
go
the
through,
lessons I need.
But then it was the question of it, whether something else was involved in it, didn't feel relevant, almost. Like, it was like, maybe yes, maybe no, but there will be moments in your life where this stuff comes along, and what is the point in not taking it to be something significant? Why would you not take it as an opportunity to move your life in the direction that you want it to move in?
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think you can entertain the thought that it might be something that's giving you that opportunity, or it might be just that an opportunity is there, and I agree with you. And I think it's not too helpful to try and battle out which of those it is, but just,
And so was that kind of, is that a good reflection of how you, within the universe?
I think that definitely. And seeing, again, I do think it's so interesting, that kind of prepare for the worst, hope for the best, do what you can to make the best a bit more likely. I find that such a helpful navigational tool for people trying to work out what the best things to do in a cancer journey. And it just felt like that philosophy really helped me stay tuned to trying and seeing how helpful it is when people can find a sort of meta purpose in it that just feels like this gives me an opportunity to do something that maybe I wouldn't have done in another way, but that I can turn into something that feels good and useful for me and other people. That is just such a helpful North Star for people to be navigating by, that I think I tried to find, or it almost felt like it came as second nature to try and do that, which I suspect it did for you. Or is it something you deliberately thought would be a good thing to do, or did you just find yourself doing it?
I don't, and like had my kind of the things I was writing like in day 3 or day 4. And I really found it like so crazy how fast I was on it, almost unsettling to read. Like I've been
Exactly. It was the first letter we got, there was a bit of, actually, is he okay? Because it sounds a little bit like you could be going manic. Like, actually, this could be the beginning of a slightly psychotic, all powerful, I see my way through, and sort of, they call it delusions of grandeur. It is that kind of, and actually then it did seem to settle down.
That was mainly because of the going through the lawyer who had been transcribing it.
There was definitely some lost in translation things that, but it felt quite prophetic, or quite like you were channeling some sort of message or something.
Yeah, I read it because it was also like, I was also like, there was a lot of my writing style. I thought I was just going to be able to hand it over and you'd be able to see how I'd been writing it, which was written in a very me way. But then I think I read it back in the WhatsApp group, and it really does sound like I'm
reincarnating as a Hindu deity or something.
And that was because you had to read it to the lawyer, did you?
Yeah, so I would go in, I would go in with read it out. And this was also Katia, so I'd been doing it with Alla, who was very much friends with all the people there. She like gave me a dictionary, she was like giving me a hug, she was like, don't worry, we'll figure it out, you're gonna move someone, blah blah blah. And then Katerina came in, who was much more, this is how that's not allowed, this is not allowed. So wasn't gonna accept any
pieces of paper
or bending any rules or whatever, in a way that Halla seemed to be okay with. But yeah, so I would read out what I had written. And so I was probably there, I don't know, also crying, like whenever I came to read messages or give messages in that little side room, I was always like, that was when the wires touched of, I'm not just an organism in a box, like I actually have a life and things that I'm missing and people that love me and care about me. So that was always the moment where it was like big emotional gushing. So I'm sure through lots of emotional gushing and reading out through the bars and through.
She was just trying to take it down as dictation.
And looking at it, and it's my messy, scribbly handwriting where if I said no, that's not the right way to say it. All this stuff, so it came out looking like that. But anyway.
And again, I think we could hear the emotion in your letters sometimes, and I think the lawyers were they were at pains to tell us how well you were doing, and how the lawyer and the ambassador was saying you said it was luxurious, and that. So I'm sure they were putting a kind of face on it, but I think we could hear the emotion in your words. And again, I think apart from frustration and anger, or a sort of no, apart from before, the emotions that I've seen or that I've experienced from you before the Belarus thing, in the few years, in most recent years, or that we've had contact, have not been that kind of, I'm so moved by things, or I'm feeling love or gratitude. I have experienced the main emotions from you as being either frustration or anger, or a sense of, I don't know what it is called when you feel injured or got at, and then that sort of sense of defensive. Yeah. So it was, for me, it was incredibly life affirming, and I've really always known and trusted that there's emotion, and it's so obvious from seeing your friends and how much they love you and all of that there's a huge amount of love in you. But it was just so lovely to be able to experience that directly, rather than have to assume it or have to see it round a corner through a mirror reflected.
I've done a lot of growing up not within your view, and maybe it should have.
Yeah, not within my view. Yeah, absolutely. I know, that's what I mean. I've always known and trusted it was there, and had indirect witness of it. But I think as a parent, it's hard not to experience that directly, or it's always hard.
And did then Belarus, my Belarus, make you look at the other parts of your life in a different way?
I think I am intensely aware of and deeply grateful for the web of community that we have around us here in Bristol, but also beyond. It was incredible to be able to just send an email to Dora, who we met first 25 years ago when we were in Hungary for 6 months and have seen once, twice, very briefly since then. But to just be able to say, look, we're in this jam. Do you know any way? Can you help? And since then, the friendship has rekindled, and so just knowing how many sort of sleeping embers of how the web is really all there, and I suppose I know not everybody has that, but it's such a fundamental part of what I think keeps me able to function and flourish. It was extraordinary, and in the courtroom, I think I have told you about this, but I just got such a strong presence of everybody on that WhatsApp group and beyond it. Really, like, it was visceral. I could feel it in my belly. I could feel everybody's kind of goodwill, and it was spilling out and just coating the judge and the prosecutor. And it was a really extraordinary experience of this just flood of goodwill and love and the best of human kind of consciousness that was just spilling into that room. It was just extraordinary. And I think I'm aware of it in many moments of coming together and breaking bread and celebrating. We do the seasonal pause at various points in the year and come together and connect with nature, or at Christmas, or at family birthdays, or little traditions, and or just at somebody else's birthday, or at my lovely poetry gatherings, or when you go to Henley's Lake and just meet lots of lovely people there. And so there are moments of touch points where you're reminded how this net sort of springs out. And WhatsApp is an incredible connector, I think. And the WhatsApp groups that pop up are a sort of the digital embodiment of that network. I think, again, I suppose one of the parts, you've done a lot of growing up away from us. And also that's meant that your friendship groups and your kind of communities are not people who we know or we've connected with. And this was an amazing opportunity to suddenly get very close to actually some of your friends who I'd never met before were incredible. And just we were sharing such sort of creative thinking time, and also such moments of ups and downs, and we'd all get a message and everybody would be like, oh God, it really does look like he's going to be in prison for 3 years, or this piece of bureaucracy is going to take ages to come through anyway. And then other moments of yes, maybe, and partly thinking about some of the ways that we could send positive communications or presence to you. That was a lovely creative moment. Other times when we were thinking, how could we get some of the paperwork done, and people were being unbelievably creative with some of the solutions and ideas that they were coming up with about how we could do that. And that I feel that caught me up in a way that just it feels like a real rich blessing to have. And I can't see how that maybe would have happened otherwise. But and to have that kind of contact with your boss and just see their perspective on you and see how much they admire and enjoy your company and enjoy your influence. It's been hard only having the family's lens on you, because that is a very one-sided, we see a version of you, or we have seen a version of you. And it was very lovely to be able to fill in the picture as well. Yes, and I hadn't really thought of what a blessing that was until you asked that question, but it really was. And it's, lovely friends and kind of parents of friends or friends of friends, or it just felt like that was a lovely part of the net to wire in.
Does that, I think I wrote it in one of the letters maybe, but being like, it seems silly that it takes something like this to know the love that's like all around. I don't know, it sounds like you do a way better job of doing that than me, basically. I'm not sure I would go to work or get to a swimming pool and feel love.
I feel like, again, maybe that is just part of having been around death and love and cancer. And I think often you just think, there are these incredible people who do love you an awful lot. Why don't we spend more time telling them that or appreciating them? I think it is something Yeah, and I think the amount of positive feedback in the net and appreciation of each other, and it was so lovely to be able to really thank the different people in your life for doing different things and to really appreciate that and be able to express it. Because I guess in a high drama situation, it's all emotions are welcome. And I suppose that is what a cancer thing. I often do feel like we bypass the kind of chit chat level quite quickly and get into what is it that really makes you feel loved, or makes you feel nurtured, or nourishes you. And those are quite great conversations to have. And so I suppose once you've had those conversations, you do feel a lot closer. And I think also the other work that I've been doing, the kind of psychedelic retreat stuff, I think that is also, it really does connect you so much more with the kind of feelings of love and connection. And you do feel, just watching other people connecting to that is itself raises the level of connectedness you feel with them, with with self-love, and with just the currents that are around. So yeah, I feel very lucky in that respect. And I think some of that has come from my parents and just the challenge. They didn't, particularly Grandpa, I think my dad just did feel very uninhibited about expressing love, and I think had a very strong friendship network group when he was growing up that he really valued. So I suppose just conveying that, and some of those connections still being very live in his life and my life. And so the friends, my parents' friends, I feel a part of that network too, in a sort of strange sense. I felt very loved by them growing up too.
I also felt very connected to Grandpa through that period. I think not in the same way that you're referring to there, but in terms of the revolutionary struggle that he was part of in 1956, and having that stopping be something which felt like it was some piece of history, but started being the reality of people that I knew, people that I cared about, and just feeling that struggle in such a real way, basically. I think I was tapping into or made aware of it, especially that the decision of, do we stay and fight for a homeland that is our own, or do we realize just there's too much here for us to ever live with the kind of dignity and respect that we would hope to be able to? Did you feel more connected to your parents' struggle through my experience and your experience with Belarus?
I think I probably, just by dint of being one generation above you, probably have connected more with the stories and heard more at quite a formative time about the sort of denouncements and the kind of terror and the sort of how good people could behave badly because, as you say, of the authoritarian boots just squashing them down if you didn't show loyalty to the party or whatever, and what is a good person and what is a bad person. Have they just had different pressures on them? So I suppose, I guess the nuance between, and the compromise and the kind of, a bit like you were saying, doing deals with the devil and not judging. I suppose I felt relatively at home in that funny mess and just thinking this is just like what my parents experienced and they managed to get through it in some way. And so there will be ways through this and you just have to find the right levers.
I remember you when you turned up in Belarus and you were just looked so at home in the place. You're just like there stomping about through the streets, ordering this weird pickled fish and having a great time in the churches and so on. You just seem so at home in the place.
I did that. I definitely, in terms of being in Eastern Europe, definitely having gone, especially because of having visited Hungary before the Berlin Wall came down and having spent time there, I definitely felt that I was, again, it was like, if it had to happen to anybody, it probably is really useful it's happened to us, because I felt, and that whole, so many people were like, why didn't you just get the hell out of there as soon as you could? And I was like, just didn't feel right, the right thing to do. And actually, it is and I did feel very comfortable there. That is right. And was made to feel comfortable as well. It did feel like, yeah, both by the lawyers and the Hungarian ambassador and that team. I felt like I was being looked out for. Interestingly, not at all by the British Embassy. I went there just to say, I'm here. I think you should know that a British citizen is here against the sanctions, and I'll let you know when I'm. And they were totally uninterested. Actually uninterested in.
And do you think then we need to feel any potential left in that story for us?
Yeah. And I guess it's one of the questions that I want to ask you is, it doesn't feel a coincidence. Belarus obviously was extreme, and that part of the story needed something extreme, or it was the fact that it was so extreme. But beyond that, is there any significance of where it happened and the bigger story that place is going through and the connections that has? It is essentially a sort of Soviet bloc. It's not, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but it is the closest thing to what was around in the 50s when my parents were alive and living through that exists, I think, more than Russia. I think Belarus feels like it embodies that sort of, it's poor, there's a craziness about the sort of the polarities. So do you feel anything will come from it? Do you feel a connection with that place? I felt like I got a crash course in Belarusian history, culture, and I'm not sure what to do with that bit of the story. And I wonder whether you feel any.
I think for me, it was just like so disorienting on a personal level. There was just so much happening inside of myself. I barely understood what was happening around me, let alone the words they were using to describe it. And so while I did feel and do feel like very connected to the plight of Belarus and the struggle for freedom that lots of those countries are going through right now, I wouldn't say it's accurate to say that I come away from Belarus feeling like a massive duty to alleviate the plight of what that country is going through. And I came away because it was, especially compared to the people around me, they were part of a much bigger story in lots of ways, whereas for me it was a very individual story, and I was very inward facing, whereas I think for lots of them, they understood what was happening in the context of what had been happening all of their life, essentially. And so I left, and my main impulse was much more to make sure I can do myself right and do myself in a way that I can stand behind and be proud of, and knowing that once I've got that locked down, as it were, from there I will start to move to a place where those efforts and that balance and energy can be directed more towards the wider problems of the world, especially reflecting on the kinds of people that it took to actually get me out of Belarus as well. I think it was very instructive for me to say these were not merely very honorable, altruistic, and loving people, but also they had gotten to a place in life where they could actually be people that made a difference, knew people, had skills, had connections, had experience with certain topics. And it was those kinds of people choosing to share their love with me, our family. And maybe even further, I would say that it didn't necessarily even feel like the authoritarian boots were actually a big part of what the experience was for us, nor what I and the people around me were struggling to deal with. It was much more, the shortfalls that we felt were much more simplistic than anything on that type of scale, I think.
But weren't the authoritarian boots that had thrown them in prison having a massive impact on their lives?
Absolutely, but just in terms of the people that I met, it felt like it was something much more simplistic. None of us were analyzing our problems on that lens in some way. It was a much more immediate and primary shortfall of needs rather than the need to live in democracy, if you see what I mean.
Mm.
And I think that's filtered out in a big way into how I think about what my duty is now, and it is just much more take ownership of the decisions and the behaviors that are immediately around you. What are the people, what are the situations that you can immediately impact, and make sure you do those right is how I'm thinking about my responsibilities for the moment.
Yeah.
For instance, staying in touch with Dima and asking him how he is, asking him how his family is, that feels like the way that I change the world more right now than writing a blog or getting on Twitter or something, or that's the level that I'm engaging in the world with.
What are you most excited about?
What a question. I mean, I've been trying to express this thought. It never seems to quite come off for people when I say it. But a while ago, I was preparing to re-enter my life in my 30s. I was in my 30s. And now I'm back in my 20s again. Not that there's anything wrong with being in your 30s, but I think that feeling of just like, it can't go wrong. I can't mess it up. I'm just gonna live, and just living is already such a lucky situation to be in that I'm not gonna tell myself I'm mucking it up. I'm not gonna tell myself that I've done it wrong or I'm misprioritizing things or being inefficient or something. It's just, I'm just gonna enjoy it. It's like it's free hit, and I think that's a very unique and special mindset to be in. And like, but it doesn't feel like it will die after 3 years. It feels like it's something that will stay with me for a long time. It's not so deep. It's, don't be so hard on yourself and live like that and point in the right direction with your actions, but don't beat yourself up if it doesn't happen exactly how you wanted it to straight away. So I think just seeing what life looks like with that attitude is the thing that I'm most excited for going forwards.
Again, I think I feel unbelievably lucky to have felt that way for quite, I feel, again, just knowing so many people whose lives have been cut short. And I guess same, probably coming through the 1956 stuff, not everybody escaped. There is this sense of actually don't take it for granted. And it is all sort of, life is a bonus kind of. What does Thich Nhat Hanh say? Something like, life isn't about looking for miracles. It's recognizing that life is the miracle. I think that attitude is liberating for sure. And I suppose it's really interesting because you were talking a little bit about meeting friends who you think, oh my gosh, you don't look very well, or you're not, and I remember you coming home most times and just being ill. Every time you came home, you were ill, and you really didn't look healthy. And this time you feel, very different energy, very different sort of physical and energetic sort of presence. So it's really nice that you haven't had to just, and we talked a bit about regressing and what does that mean, and what kind of whirlpools and eddies do we get stuck into, and what are the tethers that keep us in shapes that don't necessarily serve us the best. But it's nice to just notice that.
I guess I'm thinking as well about how some of this can sound to people, because I hear myself as presenting this very zen and grounded figurine of a person to the world, and I'm very aware that the life that I'm so far living is very far away from the stresses and pressures of what most people whose lives are stressed and pressured looks like. So I think I just want to verbalize that I'm watching myself, and I think that now in some ways is the moment where it actually becomes important to live by the words that I'm producing with my mouth. And I was aware at the time as well, but like if a situation needs something amazing to contend with it, then lots of people will be capable of doing something amazing, but actually it's the bit where the story is not the story. The story is the bit where nothing's happening, where no one's watching, where no one's paying attention, and how you behave in those moments and what you make routine and mundane is a much bigger reflection of who you are and what you contribute to the world, to the universe, than those Hollywood blockbuster hour and a half movies, podcasts. So I'm just mindful of that, and especially mindful of the fact that for most people that go to prison, like everything about their life is fucked up to bring them there, and it just gets 10 times more fucked up while they're there, and probably 10 times again when they leave. So for me to be able to, number one, not be there in the way that I'm not, but also to even process it at the time and afterwards now in the way that I'm doing is a massive function of how lucky I am.
Yeah, and how to do that, I guess, responsibly. And as you say, I love the idea of privileging as a verb. I think that is an incredible thing. And I think it is, whether you call it spreading the love or privileging other people or just using what you've got to help improve others' lots. I guess it is just life. Somebody said something that I just thought was so helpful in a way. It was like, Oscar's a wine, but one of those wines that really takes a long time to mature. And I think, but in a really good way, like you are already very mature, and actually how you handle this whole thing shows that you've got skills and tools at your disposal and resilience that is something that many people who've lived much longer than you wouldn't have found. So there is a deep maturity, but there's also a sense of actually, I really have a sense that at some point this will make a bit more sense, and I really trust where you are focusing your attention and where you are on the journey now.
And do you feel now like the story is over?
If I think about my own learning points and challenge points and the kind of developmental edge, I feel that my relationship with you is a big part of it. That kind of how I can, like you said it, how I can change the world for the best. What's my most effective way of doing that? I think those are two very live things that feel still a lot to work on and do. So in a way, I think the Belarus experience for me has been, a really important kind of catalyst for both of those things, which I think is still working. And both of those things are pretty live still for me. So no, in the sense of, if I had to name one thing, I think it is, before Belarus, I can't imagine that we'd have had this conversation, which has just been such a joy and I think it's the longest we've talked to each other without one of us getting annoyed or stomping off or getting. So
We just need to post all of our conversations on the internet, maybe.
But so I'm really, to answer your question in one word, do I think the story's over? No, but I think the story's never over, really. Do you think the story's over?
No, I don't think the story's over. I kind of wonder if that even was the story.
Yeah, exactly. It's a part of the story. It's maybe not the story.
Should we have a hug?
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to The Mirror in My Cell. Consider sharing or subscribing to catch the thrice monthly conversations. Thanks.